The Sunshine Coast Conservation Association was created in 1987. We're a registered nonprofit charity volunteer association. We represent conservation and community groups, individual members working together to protect biodiversity on the Sunshine Coast. Our work extends throughout the Sunshine Coast Forest District, which includes some 2 million hectares of coastal marine rainforest, as well as marine ecosystems surrounding the mainland, nearby islands like Texada. We work collaboratively with governments at all levels and organizations, individuals to host forums and events, undertake research and analysis, publish educational materials, and engage the public in advancing our shared conservation objectives. Before we go any further, I want you to turn off, if you haven't already done so, turn off all your cell phones and other things that go beep in the night when you least expect them to. We have a tremendous set of virtually brand new gender-neutral washrooms off to my right. The newest thing in the Roberts Creek is a brilliant idea. I want to thank the Roberts Creek Community Association for their kind donation of this hall for tonight's meeting. Let's give them a round of applause. Where's Cindy Prescott? Up there, back there against the wall. I want to thank Cindy Prescott, who's from the Cove restaurant up in Earl's Cove. She has generously donated the coffee and the tea and the baked goods, and they're quite good. Went up there, drove up for lunch about 5 or 6 weeks ago, and the food was terrific, so I highly recommend it. There are candidate tables around the room, so I invite you to have a look there at your leisure. There's also the Seniors for Climate there, and I want to draw your attention in particular to a new document which we put out. And the Canadians for Green New Deal are an offshoot of the great work of the Sunshine Coast Sue Big Oil campaign. We're sort of reaching out, and basically we put together a discussion paper called The Green New Deal for Canadian Sovereignty, Building a Stronger, Greener, or More Equitable Canada. And there's a 2-page summary. There's some small items which will take you to our website, so have a look at that at your convenience. Every election, somebody will tell you, this is a particularly important election. And the truth of the matter is, all elections are important. But this election is the very first election in our 158-year history as a country where the ballot question is very substantially the continuation of Canada as an independent sovereign country. It's clear that Trump's on-again, off-again war that is against not just Canada, but the rest of the planet, and his threats to try and annex Canada as a 51st state isn't going anywhere. But the joy is that it is bringing Canadians together in a way that has never happened in my lifetime. And at some point, we might actually want to send him a gift basket to thank you. We have don't forget, we get to choose what goes in the gift basket. You know, cyanide, strychnine, and stuff like that. Canada needs to undertake an absolutely massive reconstruction and a move away from the American economy and to reach out to our true allies around the world. And that's what the Green New Deal talks about, that if we're going to have to undertake that, and we do, then let's not just Canadianize business as usual. Let's actually go for a stronger, greener, more equitable country, so at the end of the day we can all be proud of what we've wrought. And in doing so, we can show by our living example to our good American friends who are struggling on the other side of the border that there is in fact a better way forward. That perhaps we might shine a light into the United States and say, this is how you can actually do it, how you build a country. The format of tonight's debate is the questions have been developed by the Conservation Association and Seniors for Climate, as well as a whole bunch of questions that came into the SCCA website. Additionally, Gail Riddell and Leanne Johnson, who are over here, some of you have already done so. They're going to be taking, you can write your question down on a little index card, and they're going to sort of collate them and be supplying them to me as we go through the evening. So if you haven't done it, please do. For candidates, we're going to give the candidates each 3 minutes of an opening statement before we get into the questions. When we do get into the questions, there'll be 90 seconds for response. And at the end of the evening, there'll be a 2-minute for closing remarks. We have a timer at the front of the room, Billy Carroll, who's going to be holding up a yellow card when your time is 30 seconds to run out, and a red card when your time has run out. Now, you can't see it, but underneath this lectern, I have a series of levers. And for any candidate that should perhaps prattle on a little bit too long, we want them to be as concise as possible so we can get as many of your questions answered as possible. If they go on for too long, I simply push the lever and the trap door directly beneath their chair opens up, and they will disappear and not to return until April the 29th. But I want to assure you that no candidates will be hurt in the construction of this debate. The order of the opening remarks has been chosen by random by the candidates themselves, picking a card out of the hat. And Patrick happened to draw his first card. Then we'll follow with Payman Ascari, then Jaeger Rosenberg, and then Lauren Greenlaw. When we get, that's for the opening comments. When we get to the questions, the person who spoke second will be the first to answer the second question. The person who, in the third question, or second question, the person who spoke third, and we'll just rotate through that through the evening until we get to the closing remarks, and the closing remarks will be in reverse order of the opening remarks. The last thing I want to say before we actually get into the questions is that to thank each and every candidate here for putting their name forward. Our representative democracy is incapable of functioning unless good people like these folks come and put their name forward for your consideration. And it's an enormous privilege to be chosen to represent any riding. It's also an enormous amount of work. The amount of reading, just to keep up with the issues, the travel back and forth to Ottawa, showing up at your constituency offices when you're here to be helping your constituents out, answering your mail from constituents, your constituent assistants, going out to any number of events throughout the 4-year of the term is a grueling job for anyone, especially coming from British Columbia with the distance that involves it. You can't fly from this part of the Sunshine Coast to Ottawa. You got to go through Vancouver, but it's a grind. So thank you all, because this country depends on folks like you.
Hey Jeff, where's the Conservative?
Yeah. Yes. We'll get to that.
Yeah.
My understanding is he's taken a pass on the Labour forum that was in Gibson's. He's taken a pass on the environment and the climate crisis. He even took a pass on the Squamish Chamber of Commerce. And it would appear, and perhaps he'll show up, but we wanted to make sure we kept his seat available. If he's a belated, he didn't get an explanation. He did get the invitation, as did all the others. One thing I can tell you for absolute certainty, he's not at an all candidates meeting tonight, because every other candidate is sitting right here. I'll just take this one question, but we're not going to be taking questions from the floor. What's your question?
I just wanted clarification. It seems like we're not going to allow any of the audience members to directly ask the question to the...
No, what we're asking you to do is write it on the paper.
The reason why I ask is I feel like I understand that you are the ones who are facilitating this, so you have some control. But I feel already it's a biased presentation already. You at 51st State is such BS at this point. I think that is so
Well, that's not how we're doing it. Thank you for your opinion. So let's move on to the first question. And this is for Patrick Weiler to start with. Oh, sorry. Yes. Okay. Opening remarks, 3 minutes each, please, beginning with Patrick Weiler.
Well, thank you so much, Jeff, for organizing this, and thank you all for showing up tonight. I think this is a really amazing show of how how much people are focused on this election right now. And actually, we had a mention yesterday in a conversation earlier that environment and climate wasn't a top of mind issue, and to see everybody show up here today, I think really disproves that. And I want to thank all my fellow candidates for showing up here today and answering the tough questions. I think, Jeff, you might have actually opened the trapdoor a little bit too early for Keith, and he hasn't been able to make these first events, but hopefully that'll change down the road. My name is Patrick Weiler. I've been your MP since 2019, but I got into politics because I used to practice in environmental and Aboriginal law, and I was very frustrated arguing those cases in court based on the environmental laws that Stephen Harper brought in when he gutted the Fisheries Act, when he gutted our Environmental Assessment Act, and made a mockery of our climate commitments around the world. I'm someone that's born and raised in this riding. I grew up between West Vancouver and Sechelt. Many folks in the room might know my mother from the work she's done as an environmental activist. And the reason I got into politics is I wanted to make some key legislative changes to strengthen our environmental laws. Over the last term, I've been able to do that by being part of the Environment and Sustainable Development Committee and passing an update to our most important environmental law in Canada, which is the Environmental Protection Act, which, amongst other things, due to an amendment I brought in, is creating a new right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. Likewise, like many folks, is very tired of being lied to by the fossil fuel industry, some other companies, about the environmental benefits of their projects and their companies overall. So I brought forward an amendment to the Competition Act to tackle the practice of greenwashing. So now if you make a claim about a product, you have to back it up with evidence, otherwise you can be subject to a $10 million fine. And so you're probably not seeing a lot of ads about the environmental benefits of LNG, and actually it led to the immediate shutdown of the Alberta's Carbon War Room. So I joined the Liberal Party because it was the only party I saw that can and would make a difference on climate. There's been major changes in terms of how we do nature conservation in BC. I helped champion old growth protection, which found its way into our nature agreement in BC, where we're going to protect 30% of land by 2030. The federal government committed $500 million to that, which was matched by provincial and charitable contribution. And as part of that, it's going to protect 13,000 square kilometers of old growth. I also helped champion the Pacific Salmon Strategy Initiative, which is the largest recovery strategy for any species in Canadian history. But looking forward to the debate tonight, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you very much. Damon, let's start.
First of all, I want to thank everyone who's taken the time to be here, and I would like to thank the moderator and the organizers for setting up this event. I'm deeply honored. I don't have much experience with politics, so it's interesting to get the stage and be the center of attention. My name is Payman Asghari. I am running for the People's Party of Canada. I was born in Iran, and I made my way. We were fortunate enough, my family brought us to freedom and safety in 1989. I've lived in Ottawa, Montreal, Vancouver, West Vancouver. I'm living in Whistler at the moment. I got my education here. I am a computer scientist, so I don't let the contacts fool you. I am a full-blown nerd. I'm a programmer. Unfortunately, I'm a little bit green when it comes to things like using my hands, farming, and stuff like that. My path for politics started in December 6th of 2020. That's a day that's burned into my mind, and if you want to know why, you can come ask me afterwards. I saw there's a lot of things that were developing in my country that I found very alarming. That it was a deviation from what I remember in the 90s. the concept of, you know, the sweat from your brow, to be for a man or a woman to be able to work and earn a living, and that living was theirs. And it really came to a head in Ottawa when the government froze people's bank accounts, which is essentially a seizure of people's assets. And I started asking myself, is this the country that I want to continue living in, or do I want to get involved and make a difference? Originally, I reached out to the Conservative Party. I donated to Roman Bobber. I put my support behind him. Things didn't work out. Pierre Poilievre got in for reasons I'm not ideologically aligned with him. I tried volunteering for the Conservative Party. They did not give me the time of day. I reached out to the People's Party, salt of the earth human beings. They brought me on board. They elevated me. I became the president of the riding. I was doing that for a year and a half, and then they made me the candidate, and here I am. Now, I am a little bit different from my other fellow candidates here in that we are more of a freedom party. So that includes individual freedom, individual liberty, individual sovereignty, and it sometimes comes in conflict with the climate change issue. We love, I just want to nip this in the bud, we love the environment. I love the environment. I love going in the forest with my two dogs. I'm at most peace when I'm on the land, I'm on a farm.
Jaeger Rosenberg.
Hello, I am Jaeger Rosenberg. I was born and raised here on the Sunshine Coast. I recognize how beautiful the land and water is here. And I've grown up knowing the climate crisis is coming, you know, hearing it, seeing it firsthand. We've seen more and more fires right here on the coast. We've had the droughts getting worse and worse every summer. But despite a lot of talk, no action that really solves it has been taken. You know, 2015, there was so much hope. People were caring about the environment. Justin Trudeau made all these promises. But he made a little bit. He started working in the right direction, but it was nowhere near enough. And now they're walking away even from that. You know, my generation, we're going to have to live with the effects of climate change. We already are. And it's frankly not fair. We have the least say in what happens in our government, what happens on our planet, but we're the ones most effective. Frankly, young people deserve a seat at the table so we can make that change and make the planet a better place. And it's disheartening when you see the Conservatives basically denying climate change. They've gone so far back that they want to even get rid of the corporate carbon tax, the industrial carbon tax. You know, we shouldn't be giving fossil fuel companies more money. We need to get rid of fossil fuel subsidies. It's ridiculous we're giving these hugely profitable companies public money. We need to keep big polluters accountable, make them pay for the damage they cause. You know, there's so many things we can do to protect the planet, but we need to step up and do it. And I thank everyone here today. You know, democracy dies when people don't show up, and you guys have shown up today, and you're keeping our democracy strong. We've seen around the world how democracies are fading because of low turnout, because of low engagement. I hope we don't have that happen here, and I'm really excited with the turnout we've had recently. And I really thank the other candidates for coming up here. You know, it's a difficult thing to do, but there is a notable absence tonight. The Conservative candidate hasn't shown up. This is the third debate in a row he's skipped. And I frankly think it's pathetic that he thinks he can serve the people, but he's not even showing up to a debate. He's not going to show up for you if he doesn't show up to a debate. He's too scared to be held accountable. He's having his rallies where he spreads all the lies he can because there's no one checking him, but he won't show up here where he can be corrected. And if you elect me as your MP, I will fight every day for you. I will fight for the planet. I will fight for human rights. And I will always be happy to be held to account if I mess up. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaeger. Lauren Green.
Hi, I'm Lauren Greenlaw. I am an earth scientist. I've been studying the earth for over 20 years. I'm also a municipal councillor with the District of Squamish, and I have 2 young children. And I have been waiting since I was 13 years old when the IPCC confirmed that climate change is in fact an existential threat. I have been waiting since then for somebody to take action on this problem, and we have just seen government after government after government kicking that can down the road. And I have a deep understanding of how these earth systems function and a deep understanding of what our future looks like in climate change. And it's not the only crisis we're currently facing. So often our environmental crises get boiled down to, what's your GHG? Like, what are your emissions? Which is obviously important, but we also need to change our consumeristic tactics. And we're also in the midst of the world's 6th mass extinction, and I understand what that means. It means so many things dying at one time that you can fuel an entire civilization like ours for over 100 years. So that's what we're living through right now. I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer, but unfortunately, that's our reality, and we can't sit by and watch this happen. What's happening right now is we are exceeding the planetary bounds that we are within. We have this concept that we need to have infinite economic growth in a finite system, which is a physical impossibility. So what we are proposing, what I am proposing, is that we strive for systemic change. And we move out of this fear-based voting where we're constantly ping-ponging from basically right, like farther right, and mostly right ideologies. We need to step out of this fear and start actually challenging these systems that we are within. Because the parties that be, the liberals and the conservatives, will not change a system that is serving them. And it's important that we start taking ownership of our democracy because it is failing right now. Right now in Squamish, and I'm sure it's very similar here, we are losing people in our community at an astounding rate because of the affordability crisis. We're losing people. My family has gone through 4 doctors in 7 years because doctors can't afford to live in our community. We aren't supported infrastructurally or amenity-wise by the province or the federal government. All of these issues are being compounded onto municipalities. And the municipalities, frankly, do not have the tools or the money to take action on these things. So some of the things that we're talking about doing is defunding fossil fuels and taking that money and putting it back into things like healthcare and affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we have the first question. Now that the consumer carbon tax has been eliminated, how will your government fund Canada's clean energy transition, including technology development, electrification, and infrastructure, without this key revenue stream? And we're going to start this question off with payment. 90 seconds.
It's a tough question to answer. First of all, the carbon tax hasn't been removed. It's just been brought down to 0. I suspect after the election, if Carney wins, which I don't think he will, this is my personal opinion, I believe he's going to bring it up. And then also that carbon tax has been offloaded a bit to industry. Now the question, I'm going to try to answer a different question. The question was, how do we maintain the environment? My question is, we're moving into AI. AI is going to use a lot of energy. If we're not using oil and gas, which is fine, I mean, nobody likes the smell of burnt oil, where is that electricity going to come from? Again, I'm not saying we should dump heavy metal ions into the water supply, but I want my voters, I want my community to be engaged and just to talk about these things. AI uses a lot of energy. Are we going to switch over to nuclear energy, for example? If we're going to spend more money, so if we don't have the carbon tax, we could always introduce another tax and we could raise money and we can spend it on initiatives to raise awareness amongst the community on, for example, how to recycle more effectively. But, you know, there's not an infinite supply of money, so my question is, where is that money going to come from? And that's, I'm not asking that in a negative tone, I'm not criticizing anyone, but we have to ask ourselves some very serious questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Jaeger.
Well, as I mentioned before, billionaires and millionaires are, no, worse, sorry, let me start again. As I mentioned before, we need to cut fossil fuel subsidies. The government should not be providing funds to companies that are destroying our planet. That's a huge way to save a whole bunch of money. The second thing is increase the industrial carbon tax. For the entire Liberal administration, big emitters have been paying less for the amount they pollute than regular people. I just think that's plain wrong. And one of the first things Mark Carney did was cut taxes for millionaires and billionaires. They have enough money. They can pay their fair share in taxes. We need to raise taxes on the wealthy, introduce a wealth tax, and we need to tax pollution. We need to not fund big emitters.
Thank you. Lauren.
Thanks. Yeah, well, I tend to agree. We need to defund fossil fuel industries. Right now, they are getting about $30 billion worth of subsidies from our federal government. That's not including, of course, the provincial subsidies that they receive for one of the most lucrative industries of all time. So that absolutely needs to happen. We also need to start taxing our large corporations. Right now, like companies like Amazon are getting subsidies. Like Jeff Bezos does not need money. We need our money. We need healthcare. We need access to healthcare. We need climate change reform. And also, perhaps we could give our greenwashing legislation some actual teeth so that we can go after groups like Action Canada who are splashing all over the country. If you go to Ottawa, for instance, all of the bus shelters say, Canada's LNG is going to save the world. It's all over the buses in Vancouver. I don't know if you guys are seeing it here, but I get to drive by a billboard for an LNG project that says, literally, long-term project without long-term impacts, which some would argue that climate change is a long-term impact. So we need to actually have teeth to this legislation so that we can start finding these organizations, actually stop the greenwashing, and that way also bring that revenue back. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Patrick.
So I want to reject a little bit of the premise of the question because the federal carbon price that was brought in was actually revenue neutral. All of the proceeds were sent directly back to the individuals, and actually 8 out of 10 people ended up better off, with the exception of some of the most wealthy people with large houses, cars, things like that. It's different in BC where it went into general revenue, and I think that was actually a mistake to do it that way. What we've proposed is to have the big industrial polluters pay more. We're going to increase the price on pollution that they pay, and as part of that, we're going to create a new credit where they're actually going to fund individual Canadians to make greener choices, whether that's purchasing an EV with an incentive, or doing things like buying heat pumps and doing home energy retrofits, and that will take that money off the public purse. It's very important so that we can have affordability measures as we fight climate change as well. The other thing that, one of the reasons I've supported Mark Harney for running for leader is he's been a global advocate for getting the financial sector to have disclosures of the risk that companies have if they're meeting the Paris Agreement. And by having that type of risk disclosure, it's going to move more investment into decarbonization and out of the fossil fuel sector, which we really need to see in Canada because our banks are overinvested in that space. We also have a number of investment tax credits that we've already passed that are funding things like clean hydrogen, renewable energy, geothermal, things like that. And just earlier today, we made our announcement of how we're going to build electrical grid interties between our provinces so we can leverage a lot of the opportunities we have in renewable energy.
Thank you very much. Second question, and this one will start with Jaeger. How would your government move towards a new, credible plan to reverse nature loss and meet Canada's international commitments by protecting 30% of land, fresh water, and the ocean by 2030? Jaeger Rosenberg.
Well, the NDP has committed to just that, 30% by 2030. We are working towards that. It is primarily a provincial jurisdiction, I believe. But there's lots of funding the government can do. We have money on the federal level that we can give to provinces to incentivize that they protect, forests, they protect water. One of the biggest threats to our waterways is microplastics, and it's not an issue that gets talked that much, but microplastics are poison. It's destroying our bodies, it's destroying our environments. If a fish eats it and then you eat the fish, it gets in you. And, it's one of those really interconnected issues. But, the NDP is committed to 30% by 2030. We're working towards that. We're doing it in collaboration with local governments and provincial governments, but we need that backing from the federal government as well.
Thank you. Lauren.
Thanks. I think one of the pieces where we could start is working with municipalities throughout the country to start figuring out what land is available for these 30% preservations and what is valuable to protect. I think we also need to commune with local government and local people and Indigenous people to understand what wildlife corridors might exist and what would be high quality 30%, because you don't want 30% split up throughout the riding. You want to be able to have viable corridors for wildlife to actually navigate and live healthily. So I think those are two big ways of doing it. We also need to consider the quality of like waterways and making sure that we're protecting our tributaries. That was one of the problems with Stephen Harper when he introduced, when he slashed the watershed protections. We need to make sure that those waterways are healthy as well. Basically maximizing the impact of having that 30% of land protected. Thank you.
Thank you. Patrick?
So, Canada is committed to meeting the 30 by 30 targets, and not only have we committed to it, we hosted the world as part of the Biodiversity COP15 in Montreal to get a global commitment from all countries to meet that. And that's the number that's been identified so that we can halt and reverse biodiversity loss, so that we can deal with the biodiversity crisis we have. And there's been generational investments that have been made federally so that we can get there. And a good example of this, we went from 1% marine protected areas in 2015 being protected, now we're over 15.5%. We've seen over double the area of Nova Scotia be added to terrestrial protected areas since 2015 as well. I mentioned earlier, we do have this nature agreement that we signed with BC and First Nations leadership. $500 million from the federal government, $350 million from the province, and $150 million from the BC Parks Foundation. And I think that's one of the keys here, was we have to be able to leverage more money. The federal government cannot do it alone. A lot of it is going to end up being provincial crown land, and we need to be able to leverage sources of money to do that. And there are a lot of people that want to protect some of our most sensitive ecosystems. But to Lauren's point, it is important that it's not just a number. We actually protect those areas of the highest biodiversity. I've long been an advocate for why we need to protect old growth forests, particularly when we saw what the province was doing, cutting down or proposing Fairy Creek to be cut down. These are the most important areas for us to protect from a species at risk point of view, from a carbon sink, and also from the intrinsic value. So the quality of the areas is as important as the number.
Thank you for that. And finally, payment.
Yeah, I doubt I'm going to make any more friends with my response, but I respectfully, I see it differently. We are, 96% of the land in British Columbia is Crown land. We are living off of 4% of the land, and although it's a good idea, that 4% also falls heavily under ALR. So I'm not familiar with this 30% thing, and I don't know where it's going to apply, but I'm a big advocate of privatizing the land. Like, I grew up in the urban centers. When you live in the city, you lose your mind. Like, you lose your connection with nature. Your use of garbage goes up. You cause massive sanitation problems. I mean, if you want my suggestion for how to solve this environmental crisis, environmental issue, just look at the First Nations. I mean, try to live within your means. Try to be self-sufficient. You go fishing. You go hunting. Dried berries, jarring, like living off the land. I don't have all the answers, but that's where I would start. With respect to the biodiversity treaty, biodiversity, in the US they tried to pass something that sounds very, very lovely. It was called the Biodiversity Treaty. Some professor managed to get the map of all the areas of the US that would be deemed inaccessible to people in front of a senator, and the senator vetoed it. So I'm vehemently opposed to getting people off the land. The land is our land. It's not the government's land. It's the people's land. Thank you.
Thank you. Question number 3, and we'll start with Lauren this time. What are the 3 most critical environmental challenges facing Canada and the federal government, and what would your government do about them?
Well, I think from my perspective, the 3 largest environmental crises that we're facing are climate change, biodiversity loss or mass extinction, whichever you want to call it, and the plastics crisis. So I think part of that is, again, dealing with climate change. I mean, we got to wean off of fossil fuels. We're not going to turn off the tap tomorrow, but it needs to start happening, First thing we do is defund fossil fuels, stop subsidizing these industries. The second thing we do is actually start policing them and actually making them hold true to their permits that they have, which is currently not really happening. For the biodiversity piece, I mean, we just heard part of that. We need stronger protection on our waters, we need stronger protection on our lands, and we need to ensure that we have these wildlife corridors where our wildlife can actually survive and thrive. We need to have better wildlife interface with humans. For the plastics crisis, I mean, again, plastics are, as I'm sure you all know, a byproduct of the fossil fuel industry. And I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but since COVID, there is way more plastic in my life instead of less. They had a plastics conference in Ottawa a couple months ago, and 2/3 of the presenters were plastics lobbyists. We need to get rid of lobbyists, their engagement in our government, and we need to take back our democracy from large corporate interests. Thank you.
So I'd say the three are the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, and I would say more widely it's actually the pollution/chemicals crisis that we have in the country, which plastics is a part of it. We already talked mostly about biodiversity, but I would like to see better enforcement of the Species at Risk Act in Canada. There are measures the federal government can take when we're seeing species put in the most perilous situation, and I think the best example of that is the spotted owl in BC, where it's down to 1 or if not 2 in the wild. And there are sometimes opportunities and requirement for the federal government to step in when the province isn't making the right protections and cutting down those forests, for example. On climate change, we've brought in a comprehensive climate plan that has brought our greenhouse gas emissions to the lowest level they've been since 1996. Not per capita, but in absolute terms. And this is comprehensively going after big industrial sectors, finding ways where they can decarbonize. It's supporting people to make greener choices. It's investing in nature-based solutions to climate change. And it's also work that we need to do with our agricultural sector, where we can, through some practices actually just down the road that are being modeled at One Strong Society, of how that can be a big contributor to fighting climate change. On the chemical side, I mentioned earlier, we did an update to the Canadian Environmental Protection Act that revolutionized the way that we assess chemicals. And when there are chemicals that could be at risk, we actually now have ways of putting that on the watch list before.
Thank you. Damon.
Sorry, what was the question exactly?
The question was exactly, what are the 3 most critical environmental challenges facing Canada and the federal government, and what would your government do about them?
Okay, so there's the first part. I'm going to go back to the urbanization thing. I am at most at peace when I'm on a farm, I'm in the forest. When you take people and you pack them into urban centers, it doesn't cause psychological issues, but you get a lot more depression, you get a lot more anxiety. I would say that's one thing. The other thing, mentioning plastics, like there's plastic all over this table, and I agree that there's weight. I got like 50 of these in my car, but to me that's like a cultural issue. I'm being lazy. So another issue I guess would be personal responsibility. What is our government going to do about it? Well, nothing, because we believe in individual responsibility. Like this is something that has to be done at the family level. It only takes a few seconds before you leave the house. Like don't go to a coffee shop and use generate trash. Like take it with you in your thermos. As for a third one, the only thing I can think of is the garbage that we're dumping into our oceans, but that might be China. What should the federal government do? What would our government do? 100% we need strong protections to ensure a clean environment, especially clean water. Without clean water, everybody gets sick. Thank you.
Thank you. And that takes us to Yeager.
Well, I quickly would like to counter what Payman said, because the vast majority of plastic pollution and pollution in general is caused by large corporations and the wealthy. It's not fair to blame regular people who are trying to get by, because one cup, it's not the same as what the millionaires and billionaires are doing. When the rich are taking one private jet, and in a day they're polluting more than most people do in a year. And I do generally agree. The climate crisis, the chemical crisis, and plastic pollution are huge issues. But I'd also like to add one more, which is the lack of fresh water. And we've seen that firsthand on the coast. It's a huge, huge issue here. Seashell had to have a state of provincial emergency because we ran out of water just 2 years ago. And it's something that's spreading, through all of Canada. We're going to see it more and more. And it's part of the terrafor for Trump. He thinks that there's just a tap we can turn on to send fresh water to America. We have the most freshwater lakes in the entire world, and it makes Canada a target. It makes us a target for fascists and narcissists like Donald Trump, who think they can just take our water. They can use our resources without our consent. So we need to make sure we have access to fresh water. There's still Indigenous communities in 2025 that don't have access to clean drinking water, and I think that's just a shame.
Thank you. Question number 4. What is your party's view about the possible creation of an electricity grid powered by renewables from coast to coast to coast? Oh, sorry. Yes, Patrick.
Actually, I mentioned it earlier. We made an announcement this morning about how the federal government's going to provide funding for electrical grid interties. It is an obvious opportunity. Provinces like BC have abundant hydroelectricity. We're next to provinces like Alberta that have the best potential for wind and solar. If we can trade electricity cross borders, be a less balkanized system, we can take advantage of those opportunities. When they have excess power, we have excess power. And it's the same right across the country when you look at it. We've brought in a new regulation that's going to require all electricity by 2035 to be clean electricity. And this is why we want to make sure that we're moving into all non-emitting electricity across the country. And already actually the biggest contributor to our emissions reductions has been the ban we brought in place for ending all coal-fired electricity in Canada. I mentioned earlier we brought in some investment tax credits to support renewable energy development. That's where we're going to have the biggest opportunities. I'm thinking even in places like our riding, north of Pemberton and Mount Currie, we have tremendous opportunities to produce geothermal energy. The big challenge we have is working together with the provinces. They are very jealously guarding their jurisdiction in this, but right now, with the threat that we have coming from south of the border, we're seeing movement like never before on tackling these interprovincial trade barriers and how we can work together to solve these things and build up a strong internal market and how we can work together. So I'm much more hopeful on this, and there's going to be the support from the federal government so that we can realize that.
Payment.
So full disclosure, I'm by no means an expert on energy policy, but I do know that Canada, it's a confederation, it's not a unitary state. So the first thing that we would have to decide as a government is, do we want to do this interprovincially and let the provinces decide, or do we want to do a top-down solution from the federal government? Putting that aside, if you want to get rid of fossil fuels, that's fine. Just figure out what the energy use is going to be moving forward. As I mentioned, with the explosion of AI, we're going to be needing more energy. So if you don't want to use fossil fuels, and if you don't want to use nuclear energy, and you want to use green energy, that's fine. I love solar panels when I'm out camping because, like I said, we're an individualist party. We love being independent. It's just a matter of will it support it, and will it make financial sense? It's my understanding, again, not an expert, but green energy is not as efficient as, for example, oil, as, for example, nuclear, or any other ones. So it's going to require more money, which is, again, this is a democracy. We can make a decision. If we decide tomorrow this is the path we want to take, that's fine. But we have to live with those consequences. Maybe we have to take something away from healthcare. Maybe we have to take something away from education. I have no problem with that. One final thing, I do not like subsidies because government gets to pick winners and losers. It doesn't matter whether the subsidy is for oil and gas, which I vehemently oppose, whether it's for EVs, which require getting money from the commercial banks and you have to pay interest. I'm opposed to subsidies. Thank you.
Thank you. And finish off this question with Lauren.
Did you go? Oh, it's here.
Oh, sorry. My apologies.
I think we got the order messed up. I think it's a no-brainer. We need to switch off of fossil fuels, but we also need to have energy dependence. People, During the winter, you can't have a lack of energy because then people freeze. But I also think we can solve it on a more local level. The government needs to provide funding to build this new infrastructure. But when I was living in Europe, every single house had solar panels on the roof. There were windmills everywhere. There was renewable energy everywhere. And that's the reason why they're so far ahead of us when it comes to the clean transition, the green transition. So when we're building this affordable housing, we should have the government funding to put solar panels on the roof, have more windmills in BC, because that, helps solve the climate crisis, but it also helps solve the affordability crisis. They're saving money on energy, and the solar panels produce more that they can then sell back to the grid. So it's helping people afford rent, it's helping people afford groceries, and it's protecting the planet.
Thank you. And now, finish up with Lauren.
Thank you. Yes, we need widespread electrification, but one of the concerns that I have about having a continuous grid is the wide expanse of this nation. And if anybody's driven across the country before, there are massive gaps between towns, and you actually lose an incredible amount of electricity through transmission. So yes, we need to start transitioning to renewable energies. But we should be considering also more localized alternatives, like on the coast, considering having more tidal power facilities that power locally the towns, and then having redundancy plans between towns as opposed to across the province kind of thing. We also need to invest in, I think we should have more solar for sure. There was some really cool technology coming out a few years ago where you could actually just have tiles on your roof that were solar panels. They weren't proper solar, they didn't look like the classic solar panels, they just looked like tiles. So pieces like that, we need that too, maybe run a river hydro. But the other piece is having batteries for storage, investing in battery technology, because so much of our renewable energies are variable. In Squamish, that's the place of the windy people, right? So we have wind sometimes and we don't have wind others. We have the sun during the day, we don't have it at night. So we need to have these storage capacities that are efficient in order to really transition to renewables. Thank you.
Thank you. I didn't get a chance to read it because I was too busy getting ready for today, but I saw an article in the National Observer today where a bunch of First Nations are getting together on the prairies in Alberta and saying, we've got all these orphaned wells, they've already been drilled into the earth, why don't we turn them into geothermal power? And that sounds like a hell of a good idea. So we're now on to question 5. We'll start this one with Payman. Will you bring back the housing co-op program that was so successful before it was abandoned in the mid-80s? Why or why not? Payman.
Thank you. I don't see why not. A lot of the members of the constituencies have also suggested to me that we bring back the co-op. Again, not very well versed with this, but I think we have to do whatever we have to do to lower the cost of housing and to give people an ability to live somewhere. And that the reason I say that, and I've been saying this, is you're going to get civil strife. There's 2 things that people need. They need food and they need shelter. And if they can't get that, they're either going to revolt, where we're already seeing a lot of homelessness, or they're going to go to more, let's say, extreme ideas. I'm talking about the nationalization of land by the government and giving what they're calling low-income housing. I don't want to live in a world where that's my relationship with my government. I want to be sovereign. I want the youth to have something, to be stewards of the land. So my policies will be, through the PPC government policy, will be to further that goal of the youth, the next generation. Let's face it, they're going to start taking over these election cycles. Getting 100%, I'm on board with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Jaeger.
Well, the base of this question is the fact it was defunded in the first place. Over the last few decades, we've seen liberal and conservative governments sell off, government programs that really help people. And what we've seen and what we knew all along is that doesn't work. Capitalism works in its own ways, but when people's well-being is on the line, it does not work because it always prioritizes profit over people's well-beings. We've seen that in healthcare, we've seen that in transportation, we've seen that in long-term care, we've seen it in so many issues, and we've really seen it in housing because the government has left it up entirely to the private sector. So we absolutely need more co-ops. I am fully supportive of co-ops. My party is fully supportive of co-ops. And we need more options for housing that aren't fully governed by the private sector, that will just, it wants profits. They don't care about if people are homeless or not. And we've seen people like Mark Carney. Mark Carney, when he ran Brookfield, they intentionally evicted people so that they could jack up rents. I don't think that's the person who's going to solve the housing crisis when he contributed to it.
And Laura.
Thanks. Yeah, so our community has a massive housing shortage. I'm sure yours is feeling the pinch as well. And right now our solution is build more, build faster, build condos, right? But there are other options for densification. There are some people who like living in dense downtown areas, but I love the idea of co-ops, you know. When I speak to people in my community, what they want is a deeper sense of community. They want to share resources, and they want an opportunity to put their hands in the soil and grow their own food, all of which a co-op can facilitate. So I think that's a really important, it's a really important modality to bring back. There's a loneliness epidemic in our society, there's food shortages, we need to maximize our arable land, we need to maximize people's contact with land, and we need to have diverse housing portfolios. So to my mind, absolutely we should be refunding programs like this because they give people a higher quality of life. Thank you.
Thank you. And finish off this question with Pat.
So, for my entire lifetime, there's been no federal funding for co-ops, but that changed in budget 2023 with the first investment in over 30 years in co-ops. This is a $4 billion investment. We need a lot more because we know that co-ops are permanently affordable housing, and we need more of that right across the country. There's been about $70 billion that have been invested by the federal government since 2017 in this riding. It's led to over 1,100 below market units that have been built. Things like the School Road project in Gibson's, the 2 phases of the Shaw Road project, working with Habitat for Humanity, the House of Clans. We need more of that, and we need to provide across the spectrum, whether that's social housing, affordable rental, and affordable ownership. But we're seeing a very different idea that's being put forward by the Conservatives. Pierre Poilievre calls co-ops Soviet-style housing, and he's going to completely defund all of these programs. The only thing he's proposed is bringing in a slight GST tax cut on homes. He's also promised to cancel the Housing Accelerator Fund, which is how the federal government is working with municipalities so that they can get more affordable housing built. In Squamish, that's funding things like the Squamish Community Housing Society, which is doing incredible things like protecting existing affordable housing and making sure that we can build out more new affordable housing. So this is the way that we need to go, in addition to getting more housing built writ large, and we promise to double housing construction to 500,000 a year.
Thank you. There's a question from the floor, and I'll just, Mr. Carney said today he wanted Canada to be an energy superpower. First question is why, and the second is what does that mean versus what does that mean versus doing our promise regarding climate change? That's what I received, so I'm going to leave it to you guys to figure it out. Jaeger. That's the duck up.
Well, I can assume it means that he wants to give more money to his billionaire oil CEO buddies. He's invested in fossil fuels. Like, he claims to be this big champion of climate, but if you actually look at his business records, he's made a whole lot of money off of fossil fuels, and I don't think he's going to cut it down.
It's not true. That's true.
Okay, the floor is not open. Lauren.
Sorry, I gotta restructure myself here. I have to agree with some of what Jaeger said. The Liberals, sorry, Patrick, but they have a tendency to, campaign left and govern right. If you look at Carney's track record, if you look at the Liberal track record, they've been buying pipelines, they put $200 million into an LNG facility. These are very problematic patterns. LNG is now proven to have a carbon footprint that is 33% worse than coal. So it is worse than coal. Not to mention the fact that it permanently and irreversibly contaminates groundwater with unknown chemicals. So we need to step away from this, and frankly, the Liberals have talked the talk, but really have not walked the walk. And yeah, sorry, what was the transitioning to renewables? Oh, becoming an energy superpower.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it means drill, baby, drill. And where'd you hear that before? So, you know, it's more of the same. Thanks.
So, Canada is already one of the largest energy producers in the world with conventional energy. One of the largest, and that's not going to change over the coming years. But we are getting to those points where we're seeing peak demand. Peak oil, we're about to get there this year. We're already seeing countries like China where emissions are going down. We're going to be at peak demand for natural gas by the end of this decade. So the time for conventional energy is quickly coming to a close. This is a big part of our economy right now, but the future is going to be all about clean energy. And that's where Canada really has the opportunity to lead. We've got all the critical minerals to produce the batteries, to produce all of the technologies that we're going to need. And that's what the announcement that you made today is all about. I mentioned we were talking earlier about electrical grid interties. That's how we're going to power our clean technologies. That's why companies are bringing their manufacturing here for things like batteries. We need to build on that. We have great opportunities for things like clean hydrogen, powered by renewable energy. Canada has all the assets to do that, whether that's hydro, whether that's wind, solar. We can make all that happen here. And the announcement today is how do we actually make sure that we build it? Like, how do we expedite projects without losing the robustness of environmental assessment, without violating the constitutional obligations and moral obligations we have to First Nations to be partners of those projects. But it is time to build. And if we don't act quickly, we're going to be left behind in buying all these technologies from other countries.
Thank you. And Cameron, you'll finish off this question, please.
Thank you. I don't know the context of that comment, but if he's saying it in reference to the EU, he's probably panicking because of the tariffs, so he's looking for new markets to export to. If it's in the context of Daniel Smith, Smith has him over a barrel. She's using the relationship with, she's using, sorry. She has leverage, and she's using that because America is eyeing Alberta's cheap oil and gas because they are going towards AI with Stargate. So that would be my guess. Thank you.
Okay. Now, question 7. It's not somewhat related, but here's the question. How will you promote and expand industries that create value-added products rather than exporting raw materials? For example, the export of raw logs rather than finished products. And we begin this one with Lauren.
Yeah, thanks for the question. This is a huge question I have, especially for our community, and this one as well, where lumber used to be a massive industry, but unfortunately through a series of trade agreements, effectively the milling process was offshored. And we need to bring those pieces back so that we can have a more continuous industry within our own nation. I feel the same way about the textile industry, which was emaciated by various trade agreements. If we want to survive the volatility that is coming to us through the United States doing whatever they're going to do, we need to start reinvigorating these important industries so that we have sustainable jobs that people can have for, imagine if we went back to the time where you worked in the same place and it was a reliable job for 25 years. Most people in our generation, I'm on my 3rd career already. It's a huge disruptor to our economy. We need to keep those jobs in our country. We are a very resource-rich country, as I'm sure you all know, and we have offshored a lot of the production pieces. So we need to bring those back to our own country so that we can have a more sustainable and resilient economy. Thank you.
Thank you. And Patrick.
think this is the age-old question for Canada as a country that's, drawers of water, hewers of wood. And we send so many of our raw products out to the rest of the world, and we have the main money-making value addition jobs done in other countries. And this needs to change, and I think one of the ways of doing it is being a better market for our own products. We have so many companies that set up in Canada, but they don't sell much in Canada. They sell to the US, they sell to other countries. But that's now being put in jeopardy. And this is one of the reasons why we need to take down these interprovincial trade barriers. And there's a huge momentum that's building right now to do that on labor mobility, on selling between provinces. And we really need to be able to expedite that. Because if we now we're not going to be able to have free trade access to the US, we're going to need to make sure we draw that investment in Canada so that we manufacture it here. Thinking things like the whole value chain from mining all the way to battery manufacturing and car manufacturing. We can do all of that in Canada. We need to do a major investment in the chemical processing space to do that. That's one of the big challenges that we don't have yet. But we have the resources, we've got the people, we've got amazing research institutions, but we have to focus on how we make this work for Canada. And that's going to take a dedicated industrial strategy. That's what Mark Carney's proposed. And that's what we need to bring in so that we're able to protect the jobs in industries that are going to be affected, and so that we can grow in the areas that are going to lead our economy globally going forward.
Thank you. Damon.
Thank you. I interpret the question as how do we reverse NAFTA and onshore industry. One way you can do it is through tax reform. I know, just stay with me. So you could remove capital gains, you could remove corporate tax, you could remove income tax if you want, make it tax favorable. You would have to decide how you do it, because if you do it across the board or only for the big companies, then you're going to get BlackRocks coming in. That's a whole other problem. Another one is we need to, we need to face some truths. We have a lot of labor laws in this country, specifically this province, which is good. Those labor laws are good. When you're working with high voltage, you do not want to get zapped. But you have to go through a labyrinthine maze of litigation through the workers' compensation tribunals. This stuff it slows down industry. That's what it's designed to do, to keep us safe. But the flip side of that is people would rather take their industry to China. Another thing that we could do is protectionism. Try to make it so that China can't sell their industry back to us. And finally, whatever you think of Donald Trump, but what he's doing, which is what we're describing right now, which is onshoring industry, by devaluing his currency, we need to provide a stable currency. Take Vail Resorts, Whistler. They bought that mountain at full value of our dollar. Our dollar's dropped 40–50%. They've lost 50% of their investment. They went crying to Donald Trump, and then now we got this fiasco. We need a stable dollar. I don't want to get lynched, so I won't say why I think our dollar is devalued, but come talk to me later and I'll tell you my thoughts. Thank you.
No lynchings allowed in the Roberts Creek Hall. Yeager.
Well, I think the first step to protect jobs and have good paying jobs is to have a government that works for workers instead of working for billionaires. For years we've had governments that prioritize the profits of big companies and let them move offshores, let them take all the factories away. We used to have mills all across this riding, but pretty much all of them are gone because the government hasn't kept them here. They haven't done the work to get the companies to want to stay here. Companies, they have one purpose, it's to make as much profit as possible. They don't care if they're helping people, that's the bottom line. We've seen that with Mark Carney's company that avoided taxes by moving offshores. But, it's the government's duty to make sure that the people are being served. So another thing that every individual can do is buy Canadian. The government needs to make sure we have reliable labeling that shows, it was manufactured in Canada, it was made with Canadian materials, so people know this is a Canadian product, this is worth spending my money on, it's adding to our economy, it's spending on our economy. We can also give tax incentives, so it doesn't increase costs like tariffs do, but it reduces costs on Canadian products and helps bring jobs back.
Thank you. Next question from the floor. What is your party policy regarding local use and export of LNG? And we start this with Patrick. What is your party policy regarding local use and export of LNG?
Okay, well, I mean, I guess the first part of that question, I don't see us having any local use of LNG. I mean, that's for an export from Canada. I mean, from Canada, from our perspective, we committed to bringing in a cap on emissions from the oil and gas sector, which will ensure that the emissions from the oil and gas sector don't go up over time, and actually will lead to industry investing in reducing their emissions. Like any other project, it needs to go through an environmental assessment where you're going to go through, make sure that any of the potential environmental impacts of it are going to be addressed. So beyond that, there isn't a specific policy for or against LNG. And this is one of the things we need to be very mindful of with the constitutional division of powers that we have in the country. I mean, the federal government can't determine how natural resources are used in provinces. And we need to be very careful of that, because anytime we bring in a policy, we know we're going to get sued from Alberta, Saskatchewan, sometimes Ontario, and even Quebec. And so we need to make sure that everything that we do is very much in line with that, so it has the staying power that's necessary.
Thank you. Payment.
Short answer, it goes back to the previous question, how do we bring back industry? Oil and gas is technically a form of an industry. You don't have to agree with it, but the People's Party position is we should be exporting it. We should be stewards of our land. Stewards of the land doesn't mean just that you maintain the land and you keep it. It means you also invest in it and extract the resources. I would prefer to have a healthy economy and create jobs for the youth, for industry. So yes, we are on board. Thank you.
Yeager.
Well, this is primarily a provincial jurisdiction, I believe. The NDP position and what we've done provincially is make sure there are high regulations to get these projects passed, so we can make sure that it's not causing damage to the local waterways and local environment, while also allowing the money to get added to our economy. You know, people are still using fossil fuels. We want to get transitioned off of them, but if it's going to be used, we would prefer it to be Canadian fossil fuels, so that can make jobs for us. You know, I personally believe that it's not a worthwhile investment. You know, 2030 is when we're expected to have irreversible damage from climate change. So it's 2025. I personally don't think it's worth investing in all these, you know, pipelines and fracking. It doesn't make sense when we should be transitioning off. I think we should prioritize other forms of energy to make jobs and get energy from. That's my position, and that's the NDP position.
Thank you. And Lauren finishes off with.
Thanks. I think it's important to point out that not all industry is created equally. It is important that we support local industry, but the oil and gas industry is a bit of an exception. We cannot have a healthy economy without a healthy environment. All of our resources come from the earth. The two are intrinsically intertwined. 2030, by the way, is also when the bottom of the LNG market is expected to drop. So that's another absurdity in this entire conversation. Again, coming back to a former point that I made, we're not going to turn off the taps immediately. That's not realistic. We have to taper down. We really need to step away from fracking, though. There are other ways to extract methane. Why brand it with LNG? But we absolutely should not be exporting this resource. There is actually no market for it. This entire giant push that you're seeing all the advertising for everywhere is trying to force a market into Asia that does not currently exist. It's really, if you haven't looked into the LNG market, if you haven't looked into these projects, it's infuriating. And another piece is, as a federal body, we have started to remove the oversight for large industrial projects. That's a huge red flag. We have an LNG project, Pow Sound, as you probably know, that is regularly having, let's say, issues with their permits, and it's rarely enforced.
Thank you very much. Question that Canada has adopted UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and British Columbia has passed DRIPA into law. How would your government invest in Indigenous-led land use planning, the establishment of Indigenous protected and conserved areas and their stewardship by Indigenous guardians. In other words, create a greater recognition and respect for Indigenous knowledge in all aspects of nature conservation in Canada. And we start with payment.
Thank you for the question. With all things Indigenous, I think it has to start with respect. So showing enough respect for the other Indigenous member of the community to actually go out to them and ask them, like, what are your grievances? So I'm going to bring out something that's, it's a sensitive issue, but with the Kamloops school incident. Some people believe that there were mass graves, some people believe that they weren't, but the Indigenous people believe it in their hearts that it did happen. So something happened to them that made that happen, and I believe that something is the fact that Canada tried to stamp out and suffocate their culture through the whole residential school things. What does that have to do with land? I want these people to have the same dignity as a human being that I have, the First Nations community. I want them to own property. As you can tell, I'm a huge property rights guy. If UNDRIP furthers that, then I support it. I haven't read on, I'm fully aware of it. I haven't read it. I'm not a lawyer, but one thing that we have to be very careful about, when things like this hit the media and it says, and the media blows everything out of proportion and they say, UNDRIP, we're going to take the land and give it to someone else, people get they get in a sense of anxiety. They feel like they're going to lose their land. So we need to increase the communication, figure out, what will this UNDRIP actually do, and if it furthers their ability to have property rights within their reserve, which I think they should, then I support it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Jaeger.
Well, I want to take a step back and think, why is it so necessary that we have UNDRIP? Why is it so necessary that we have truth and reconciliation? And the reason why is because Canada and our government committed genocide. We destroyed Indigenous culture, we destroyed their way of life, we killed millions and millions of Indigenous people. And we need to atone for that. And we can't do that by having this paternalistic mentality of, this is how we need to do things, talking down to them. We need to have conversation as equals. Listen to what they have to say, listen to their experiences. They've lived on this land for tens of thousands of years. They know it best. When we're doing environmental projects, we need to listen to them. They have their ceremonies in the forest. They know where their protected areas are. We need to listen to that. And we need to work on reconciliation as a whole. It's a huge issue that encompasses pretty much everything. One of the biggest disparities between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians is the mental health crisis and mental health outcomes. And we need to address that. We need to get more support so we can lift them up together. We can work together as a community, come together as Canadians, and work for a better future that protects the environment and atones for the first sin Canada committed.
Thank you. Lauren.
So would you mind repeating the question, please?
Not at all. Given that Canada has adopted UNDRIP and BC has adopted DRIPA, how would your government invest in Indigenous-led land use planning, the establishment of Indigenous protected and conserved areas, and their stewardship by Indigenous guardians? In other words, create a greater recognition and respect for Indigenous knowledge in all aspects of nature conservation in Canada.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think a key component of this is, one of the things that I really reflect on is how deeply intertwined culture is with land. And I think part of what needs to happen in this situation is really trying to facilitate First Nations building their culture back. We need to work on the child protective services and the penal system that are unjustly targeting Indigenous peoples so that they can have their people in their communities. We need to help rebuild their languages, help give them resources to build their languages and teach people. And through language, you learn so much about their relationship with land. We get to talk to knowledge keepers and really understand what pieces of the land need to be protected and what parts of their culture that is tied into. So I think it's a much bigger conversation than just talking about the land. It is about cultural reconciliation, essentially, and helping bring those cultural pieces back to those people and helping to empower the people in the first place. And again, to Jaeger's point, we do not want to have a paternalistic approach on this, but we need to have significant engagement with Indigenous governance and Indigenous people in general. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Patrick, you get to finish off this question.
So, I think it's a critical part of the truth and reconciliation process. I mean, you're certainly not going to see it from the Conservatives, and Conservatives are running somebody riding north of here that's denying the harms of residential schools. You have a leader like Pierre Poilievre who said Canada got bad value for money or a class action settlement for the harms of residential schools, and that Indigenous people just need to learn the value of hard work. So, the way forward on reconciliation, what I've heard from a lot of First Nations is there's healing on the land. And so when we're looking ahead at how we do conservation, we can't go through another colonial process where First Nations were to have land taken away and to take it away again and put it in conservation. And this is the approach that we're taking across the country. All protected areas, all of the 30 by 30 goals are all going to be done in partnership with free, prior, informed consent of First Nations. We've seen what that looks like in BC. The agreement that we signed, the Nature Agreement, it's a tripartite agreement. Federal government, the province, and First Nations Leadership Council. The lands that are going to be protected are the ones that are identified by Indigenous peoples. When we're talking about Guardians programs, it's who's going to manage that going forward. And it's important that Indigenous people are there on the lands to be doing that. And I think there's a great opportunity talking about the Sunshine Coast of how we can do that, how the Sechelt Nation can be a key partner and have an Indigenous Guardians programs so that we can all protect the sacred lands that are on the Swaya here too.
Thank you very much. We've got time for just one more question. Question number 10. Canada's biodiversity is rapidly declining, with many species at risk of lacking habitat protection and recovery actions. What specific commitments will your government make to enforce the Species at Risk Act and address the extinction crisis? And we begin this last question with Jaeger.
Well, I think we need to start spending money to bring back extinct animals. We just saw that direwolf get brought back. Why are we wasting money on that when we have so many animals at risk that are already alive? You know, we have beautiful forests here. You know, we have cougars that are endangered. We need to stop hunting endangered species. You know, and we need to create that separation so that, you know, we don't have the risk of animals coming down in inhabited communities and then we have to shoot them. We need to educate the public as well. You know, in Vancouver, there was a big problem with people getting bitten by coyotes because they kept feeding them, they got too used to people. We need to educate the public so they know better than to do that, so we keep that separation so the nature is beautiful, you know? We shouldn't have so many, you know, for-profit zoos that treat animals terribly, so then, you know, people have this good feeling, you know, tigers aren't extinct because, you know, I'm seeing it in a zoo. So then we don't invest properly in actual conservation efforts. You know, I think we need to redirect the focus to real nature solutions instead of this kind of for-show solutions that we've been doing.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thanks. Well, I mean, I think part of it is we need to take recognition of what animals we're trying to protect, and we need to actually try to protect them. Right now, there's a ski hill that's trying to be open near, I think it's near Chilliwack, and it's this habitat for an endangered spotted owl. And they just tried to say that they don't need to study that in that area. In Squamish right now, we have pipelines running through western toad habitats, which are protected as well. I don't know if they're protected, but they're a species that is being monitored. So we need to actually follow this science and actually try to take actions to protect these species first and foremost. And we also need to, as we talked about earlier, just making sure that we're protecting corridors, making sure that we're having as much value in the land that we're protected as we possibly can, so that we can have viable habitats for all of these animals. Thanks.
Thank you. Patrick's next.
So I think this is really a question that comes down to science. I mean, there's so many species that are endangered across the country, and we don't, as you mentioned, we don't have enough recovery strategies in place. And I think it really started with when Stephen Harper drastically cut back the science that the federal government was doing. There's been investment in bringing in more scientists on board, but we have a long ways to go to actually fully identify the problem before we can get to the actual solution and how we address it. You know, in terms of the solution, yes, it's making sure that we have more protected areas that are set up, focusing on those areas that are key habitat for some of these species at risk. And it's going to mean necessarily, in many cases, working with provinces and territories who have jurisdiction in those areas. And ideally, you want to work in collaboration to do that, but there are options for the federal government to step in to make those protections if it's not happening. And so I think really from the beginning, it's a question of science, and it's what worries me if the Conservatives will get into office, because you look at what's happening south of the border in science, you're seeing DOGE completely eviscerate the science that's being done in environmental areas. We can't have that happen in Canada. We need to actually build on it. We need to understand our environment better. And this is what really worries me about some of the things the Conservative Party is proposing. That's one of the reasons why they're probably not here tonight.
Thank you. And the last speaker on the last question is Ping.
So I don't know thanks for the question. I don't know the premise of how or why these animals are going extinct, so I'll try to avoid that a bit. But I don't see it as a funding problem. I see it as a cultural problem. I shouldn't say a problem. I loved it in the 90s, growing up in a community where everything was tight-knit. We used to go on hikes, and I was an immigrant kid, and they used to tell me things like this is skunk cabbage, and it's a snow-capped mountain. And if we take personal responsibility, somebody is going to teach the kids to respect the land. The question is it going to be the parents, or is it going to be the government? I think you know what my position is. Now, I'm going to say one final, possibly very, very polarizing thing. It's a fact of life. As the population grows, you're going to get less animals. We're seeing it right now, like Squamish, for example, is growing. We've brought in, I think in 2023, we brought in 1.2 million people, 400,000 of those were immigrants. It's a decision we have to make. Do we want immigration, or do we want to protect the environment? It's a tough one. I can't make that decision for you, but that is a consequence of growing the population too quickly. Thank you.
Thank you. Of course, the largest single species are human beings. It's been a great debate. We're now going to turn to the reverse order of speaking for 2 minutes of closing remarks from the candidates, and we begin then with Lauren.
Okay, well, there are a couple things I would like to just touch on that have occurred to me throughout this debate. First of all, yeah, humans are animals, and it's important to remember that we exist within this web of life, and that we are not external to it. We never can be external to it. We think that we are dominant of it, but we in fact are not, and that is being taught to us very clearly by our environment. Another piece is I wanted to touch back to that question about DRIPA, land back. Like right now our government is tying reconciliation to LNG projects in a very disturbing pattern. And it's incredibly wrong. We just need to give the land back as much as we can to the original stewards so that they can steward it. Another piece, there are 3 pillars of democracy. It is the media, it is science, and it is the legal system. And absolutely science is under attack, and it has been for a long time. So is media. So these are some pieces that I just think are important that we need to keep in mind in this environment where we find ourselves. We are at risk of being, of going into extreme echo chambers, and it is very dangerous when we don't have these touchstones. Another piece I wanted to touch back on is the REE market, rare earth elements, which are required to make these high-powered batteries, are actually being monopolized by the Chinese government, and most projects that we have within Canada are not financially viable. Anyways, those are some pieces that I want to touch on that I meant to touch on during the debate, so I hope you don't mind that. Anyways, what I'm talking about doing in this election and throughout this campaign is talking about systemic change. We need to have systemic change in our government. We need to have electoral reform. We need to have prioritized protection of lands and water and resources. So we are trying to challenge a system that does not want to change, and we cannot do it until people act boldly. Thank you.
Thank you. David.
This election is one of the most consequential in our lifetime. Really, it's a choice between whether we want to have a multi-party system where governments are held to account, or if we want to devolve into a two-party system like America. I'm also going to say sorry if I'm squinting all night. These lights are really bright. I can't see any of you, honestly. But do we want to devolve into a two-party system like America, where power switches between the two corporate parties that don't care about Americans, and slowly break down the corporate barriers so corporations and billionaires buy elections instead of people? And it's a choice between candidates. It's different visions, different parties. You know, do you want the Liberal Party that says good things during elections but has been in power for 10 years and continuously to fail to deliver on the climate? Do you want the Conservative Party or People's Party that don't even recognize that it's a major issue? Do you want the Green Party that's been too focused on fighting themselves to actually fight for real solutions? No offense. Or do you want the NDP that for 5 years has been fighting for everyday people, getting results for people, and has been based in grassroots democracy since our foundation? I think the choice is clear, but it's up to you to decide what vision you think is best for Canada and what vision you think is best for your community, our community. And what I do encourage you to do is do not vote out of fear. When we vote out of fear, it weakens democracies. We don't make good decisions. Look up the platforms, look up the parties, talk to us candidates, and vote for who you think will represent you best in Ottawa.
First of all, I'd like to thank everyone in the audience. You were absolutely lovely. I was freaking out on the way over here. I seriously thought I would get more booze. Sir, you did a fantastic job. This has been definitely the best debate of the three that I've been to, so thank you very much. Everybody knows that I like my whole drive in running for office is to try to get people to, and I'm asking them one simple question: what do you want your relationship with government to be? You know, you can't get past 100% government. Where would you, as a people, as Canadians, want to draw the line between family responsibility, culture, community, religion, and government responsibility? Me personally, I do not like the fact that we're going in this direction. It matters not to me whether it's the Conservative Party or the Liberal Party. The final thing I'll implore upon you, please be lovely to one another. Do not allow yourself to fall into the trap of calling the Conservatives fascists, or calling Donald Trump fascist, or calling Mark Carney communist, whatever you put in there. The moment we do that, we lose our critical thinking skills. We lose our ability to reason, and we're going to be herded by the media towards some direction that we don't want to go. So please be smart, be responsible, and exercise an educated vote, preferably for me, but if not, vote for whichever party you like. Thank you very much. Have a great night.
Thank you very much. And we finish off with Patrick.
Well, first, thanks, Jeff, so much for moderating this debate. I really want to thank my fellow candidates for coming up here, answering the hard questions, and for sharing your perspective on some of the really important environmental issues we need to tackle. And certainly for everybody coming here today for listening to us and asking us these questions. It's been the honor of my life to be your MP for the last 5.5 years, and it's been a real honor to be able to work directly on some of the really important changes we need to make to protect biodiversity, to fight the chemicals crisis, and to take strong action on climate change. As I mentioned before, there has been a lot of work that has been done. Our emissions are the lowest they've been since 1996. We have a long ways to go to get to our targets of getting to net zero by 2050. But you know, if you vote for me, I'm going to keep working on this. I want to bring in a Nature Accountability Act to hold future governments accountable to meeting their biodiversity targets. I want to make sure that we bring in a cap on emissions in the oil and gas sector so we can actually meet the targets that we've set. But, it's been said a couple times, this is a very consequential election because there's something very different on offer. And of course, Heath is not here tonight to share that. And we've seen what it looks like south of the border. You've seen how parks have been eviscerated, science is being eviscerated, the complete abandonment of the fight against climate change. And we can go down that road, and that's what the Conservatives want to do. They want to drill, baby, drill, and pretend like this is an issue that we have to deal with. And, they've already got the playbook. The oil and gas industry has asked for getting rid of our environmental system, getting rid of our greenwashing legislation, getting rid of our methane regulations, no cap on emissions from the oil and gas sector, getting rid of our tanker ban in the Northeast. So we've got a lot of things that are at stake in this election. If you vote for me, I will fight for these things and to do even more. And we have a leader in Mark Carney who's globally recognized for his work in fighting climate change. That's why he was appointed the UN Special Envoy for Climate and Finance. This is the kind of leadership that we need, and we'll go even further than we've gone in the last few years.
Thank you very much. Well, you've heard from 4 courageous people, each of which were looking for your vote, but I want you to give a round of applause to the most important people in this room, you who have the vote.
You cannot talk here.
And your job, if you follow First Nations customs, your job is you came and you witnessed, and now you have a responsibility to carry what you've witnessed out into your community, your friends, your family, your co-workers. Talk to them about what you heard tonight, what you hear elsewhere, and have a safe trip home. And let's do our best, get out to vote, and let's see what happens on April 28th. Thank you very much for coming. I think that some of the candidates may want to hang around, so if you want to have a personal word with